Joe Kissell takes control of the newest edition of 1Password. This is MacVoices. Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by Kolide. Kolide is a fleet visibility solution for Mac, Windows, and Linux that can help you securely scale your business. Learn more at kolide.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, while we were at CES, Joe Kissell was busy updating and releasing his take control of 1Password to the 6th edition. And so we're a little bit behind talking to Joe about that, but Joe Kissell was here. Joe, good to see you.
Hello, nice to be here as always.
This is the first time in 2023. I can't believe it took us until February to get it done.
Yeah, well, time keeps on slipping into the future.
There you go. Little pop culture reference there. So, 1Password, I mean, first of all, I feel an obligation to say up front, I am a 1Password user. I'm a 1Password fan. So having said that, though, there seems to be a bit of a kerfuffle over the new version of 1Password. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. So, boy, I don't even know where to start with this story. But anyway, 1Password is currently at version 8. I mean, it's 8 point bunch of digits after that. I'd have to look up what it is at the moment. But I had, the previous edition of the book sort of talked about 1Password 7, and preliminary kind of preview versions of 1Password 8 were available for certain platforms, and everything was just sort of coming together. And since that old version of the book came out, 1Password not only was updated to version 8 across all platforms, but then version 8 was updated over and over and over and over again. And as we'll talk about later, it's even been updated since my book was released. So, but the change from 1Password 7 to 1Password 8 was a really, really big one. And it was a bigger deal for Mac users than for anybody else. And as you say, there was a kerfuffle. So maybe we'll just talk about that for a few minutes.
I think it's important because anyone that's out there looking for a password manager, and there are people that are going to be saying, oh my God, 1Password this and 1Password that. And I think they need to understand what the issues are from someone that's a bit more objective.
Yeah. Well, I write about the kerfuffle in considerable detail in my book, but we'll just explore a little bit of it here. So, software gets updated all the time, and companies add features and they make user interface changes, and so sometimes features go away, sometimes new features appear, sometimes things go away for a while and then come back, and this is just normal. Okay, all software is like this, nothing surprising. And if an app takes away a feature that you like, that will make you unhappy. And if it adds a feature that, slows down your system or gets in your way, that'll make you unhappy. And then sometimes I never thought of this. This is great. This is lovely. This makes my life easier. So there are good things. So that's just how software always is for all platforms, for all time. And that's fine. And this process has happened with 1Password as well over the years. I mean, this book's in its 6th edition, and I've been using 1Password since like version 1 point something or other, like a long, long time ago. And I've seen and documented a lot of changes, some of them good, some of them not so good. But the one change out of many that really got people up in arms over the switch from version 7 to version 8 was something called Electron. Now, as you know from your high school physics class, an electron is negatively charged. And that's how the reactions were to 1Password's use of Electron. So for those of you who aren't developers or aren't, don't follow sort of tech minutia very carefully, Electron is something that developers use, something that programmers use to make their lives easier. It's a framework that allows programmers to use the same tools they would make when building a website, such as cascading style sheets and JavaScript and other web-based technologies. They can use those same technologies to build a desktop app that will run on Windows or Mac or Linux, what have you. And this is nice for developers because they, number one, get to reuse the skills that they have from building things for the web. Number two, they can build something once and with just very minor changes get that app to run on 3 major desktop platforms rather than saying, well, we have to build a Mac app from scratch and then we have to build a Windows app from scratch. It's quite a hassle. And one of the problems that 1Password has had for years and years and years is that the Mac version and the Windows version and the Linux version and the mobile versions were all out of sync with each other. I'd have to say, well, this feature exists on Mac, but it doesn't exist on Windows. Whereas this feature exists on Windows, doesn't exist on Mac. And this feature exists on iOS, but it doesn't exist on Android. And there's just like a million of those things. So 1Password decided that they would use this platform called Electron to make their app, and they would use this for all of the desktop platforms, and so that they would all look the same, they would all act the same, they would all have the same features with a few little minor variations. So why would anybody not like that? What's wrong with that? Well, the major complaints that Mac users have about Electron-based apps, first of all, they don't tend to look or feel like real kind of built from scratch native Mac apps. They're native only in a narrow technical sense, but they behave as though you just have a web browser in a separate window and that web browser contains only one app, but otherwise it sort of looks and acts like a web browser. So it's not that it can't do the things it needs to do so much as that it just doesn't feel right. Things don't look and act the way I might expect them to, and that's true for all platforms. But an even bigger concern is that Electron apps tend to be really, really resource hungry. So they use up tons of RAM, tons of CPU while doing hardly anything. And they're big, big apps too. So people are like, well, I have this gigantic app that's sucking up all of my processor power and all of my RAM, and it's not doing any more than I could do in just a web page. And for all that, it doesn't even look or feel right. So a lot of people, myself included, have built up a sort of negative impression, negatively charged impression of Electron for good reasons. I mean, I've spent a lot of time using Slack, and Slack is an Electron app, and it adds very little compared to what you get in just a web page, and it's annoying. And there are a bunch of other examples too. Slack might be the best known one. There are plenty of others. There are other password managers that use Electron. Anyway, when I heard about this switch, I was like, that's going to be rough. And the first several betas were, in fact, very, very rough. And I was like, oh man, everything about this is painful. That doesn't look right. It doesn't work right. And it just sucks. But as time went on, the 1Password engineers did their homework. It turns out that Electron as such is not the problem. Electron is just a tool. It's a tool that can be used for good or a tool that can be used for evil. I mean, the same thing can be said about money, right? About lots of things. It's a tool. And if developers put in the time and effort, an Electron app can be just as good a citizen in terms of, performance and RAM and CPU usage and size as any other app. And all of these little annoyances that people are like, oh, you can't even move the preferences window because it's not a real window. It's just a view. But they're like, but actually you can. You can change a setting so that you can now move around the preferences window. It's not an inherent problem to Electron. It's a problem of developers being lazy and not putting in the effort to make their Electron apps work the way they should on each platform. So Agile Bits folks put in the work. And I won't say that it's perfect. It's definitely not. I won't say that there aren't still some remnants of the electronness of it that irritate me a little bit. There are. But I hardly ever even notice it or think about it anymore. I'm like, but it has these new features which are great and which I never had before, and that's awesome. And as somebody who switches platforms all the time and who has to write about, well, I have to write about the Windows version, I have to write about the Linux version, being able to describe something once for 3 different platforms is wonderful. So what I would really say is I think that for the most part, this was a tempest in a teapot. It's not that there weren't some real issues, and it's not even that there aren't still some issues, but they're not huge issues. And as time goes on, the issues keep disappearing. So there are fewer of them now than there were even a month ago. So if you are not the sort of person that really looks deeply into the look and feel of apps and performance and all that kind of stuff, you might not have even noticed. It's more the geekier folk like me who have been burned by Electron apps in the past, had every right to be skeptical about 1Password 8. But my feeling is, just give it a chance. Give it a chance. You will be pleasantly surprised. So that's not the only issue, the only consideration. There were some complaints about the licensing model because now you have to subscribe. You can't buy a one-time forever license anymore. And the only way you can sync your data now is via the 1password.com cloud. So you can't sync it via Dropbox or iCloud or whatever anymore. You used to be able to do that. You can't do that anymore. And I know that there are people that are unhappy about those things for reasons. And I talk about those in the book and like, well, this is the way it is. And this is why it's this way. And this is why, in my professional opinion, you don't need to be unhappy about that. But I mean, if you're unhappy about it, go use a different product. And what else can I say?
Okay, so let me throw just a couple things out. First of all, I was one that when I upgraded to 1Password 8, it's like, oh, it looks a little different. Yeah. Then again, I can think of a half dozen honest-to-God Mac apps that have upgraded things in, let's just say, the past year. And when I open the new version, it's like, oh, it looks different. Right. So never really, thought about it. That's not a big thing.
Yeah.
I think your comments about the upgrades that have and updates that have continued, bringing features back, making changes. I go back to thinking when Final Cut was rewritten and first came out, and a lot of features weren't there, and we all had to wait for them to come back. It happened with the iWork suite as well. Mm-hmm. So when you're rewriting something, if you waited until you got it to parity, then it would be, first of all, it would be forever. And it probably means that you weren't keeping up the old version of the app anyway. So, there's that.
Mac users, let's say Mac users of a certain vintage might remember such scandals as Microsoft Word 6. There have been times when a major developer made sweeping changes and you're just like, oh, no. Okay, so I get that, but just to take one example, during the early betas of 1Password 8 for Mac, one of the things that didn't work and made everybody super mad was command \\. So that was for a decade plus, that has been the shortcut. You press Command backslash, and that fills in your credentials. It's in everybody's muscle memory. Those two Command backslash, Command backslash. And for a while, that didn't work, and you had to press Command Shift Spacebar or something to get the same thing. And everybody's like, "Oh, come on! Is this you? Just because you can't use Command backslash on Windows, does that mean that Mac users have to lose this thing that we've become accustomed to in all these, for all these years?" And then Agile Bits is like, "I'll tell you what, we're going to give you back Command backslash, and not only that, but we're going to make it better, because now not only does Command backslash work again, it works everywhere. It doesn't just work in Safari. It just doesn't just work in browsers. It works in other random apps. So I have other apps that I have to open, and I have to log into accounts." And I just found myself, so like I sell books on the Apple bookstore. And so in order to do that, I have to use an Apple app called iTunes Producer. Yes, it's still called iTunes Producer. And yes, we still use that even though we're not doing music. But anyway, this is the app. And one day I opened this app because I'm going to submit a new book to Apple. And just out of reflex, when it asked me for my username and password, I typed Command backslash, and it just filled it in. And I'm like, wait, what? How did it do that? And so that's universal autofill, and that's one of the numerous new features in 1Password 8 that we never had before. And I am really happy about that. It makes my life so much easier. And of course, there's a bunch more. So that's why I say, before you get all out of sorts over what's new, it's just about give it a try, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
Today's edition of MacVoices is supported by Kolide. Our sponsor Kolide has some big news. If you're an Okta user, they can get your entire fleet to 100% compliance. How? If a device isn't compliant, the user can't log into your cloud apps until they fix the problem. It's that simple. Kolide patches one of the major holes in Zero Trust architecture, device compliance. Without Kolide, IT struggles to solve basic problems by keeping everyone's OS and browser up to date. Unsecure devices are logging into your company's apps because there's nothing there to stop them. Kolide is the only device trust solution that enforces compliance as part of authentication, and it's built to work seamlessly with Okta. The moment Kolide's agent detects a problem, it alerts the user and gives them instructions on how to fix it. If they don't fix the problem within a set period of time, they're blocked. Kolide's method means fewer support tickets, less frustration, and most importantly, 100% fleet compliance. Visit Kolide.com to learn more or book a demo. That's Kolide, KOLIDE.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Kolide for supporting this week's MacVoices. The other thing, too, that I just have to comment on, especially, 1Password is the poster child for it, is the subscription model.
Yeah.
I want 1Password to be a subscription model, because then I have expectations that all those updates are going to keep on coming, and they're going to come frequently. Sorry, Joe, for you. But, they're going to make it a more secure product. That it's not just going to be focused on the functionality, but it's going to be focused on the security. And I want my password app to have the best possible security. And look, if that means giving up syncing through iCloud or Dropbox or whatever, and just going straight to their servers because you put all your eggs in one basket, but then you watch that basket very carefully.
Yeah. Well, in fact, there are these two issues are related, but they're really two separate things. So there's how you pay for it, the licensing model, and then there's how you sync your data. So year and a half or however long ago, 1Password 7 was the only version you could get for a Mac. They introduced the 1Password accounts as an option. You could buy the standalone product, or you could subscribe and pay them whatever it was, $36 a year or something for a license. And either way, it would work. And then they gradually started phasing out the standalone product and making it harder and harder and harder to find. And eventually it said, yeah, as of version 8, that's just not even possible anymore. The only way you can license it is to pay us an annual fee. Now, as far as the annual fee goes, sure, like everyone, I've experienced some unhappiness around software subscriptions. There are places where it feels really appropriate, and there are places where it really doesn't. If I am paying a company whatever, it doesn't matter if it's $20 a year or $100 a year, but if I'm paying them annually, and over the course of a year, I get almost no new features, I still have outstanding bugs, it doesn't end up improving my life at all, then I think that's just wrong. If you're making me pay monthly or annually, I want to see active development. I want to see you making it better for me, and I want to know that I'm continuing to get a lot of value out of it. Like for me, boy, I don't know if I want to go off on this tangent, but I'll just say I don't like the idea of paying Adobe an annual subscription for however many Adobe apps I want to use. And so I have a license, the last version of Adobe Acrobat, which is the only Adobe product I actively use. I bought the last version of that you can get still today in a standalone version, and I will use that until it stops working, because for me, the additional value I get from one year to the next out of very, very minor changes to Acrobat, they don't affect me. They don't affect my work. They don't help me. And so I feel a little bit of resentment about having to pay monthly or annually for that. And I don't want to pay for apps like Photoshop that I just don't use. Okay, so there have been some subscription models where I just think it's a pretty transparent cash grab, and it's not, we're doing this to support continued development. But as you say, 1Password is not one of those. 1Password is under very, very active development, and they have outstanding tech support, and they have extreme security. And when it comes to something as important as my password manager, I don't want to run the risk that because they didn't get enough subscribers, or they didn't have enough people buy their standalone license, that they're not going to have a next version, or that a bug won't be fixed. I don't worry about that at all with 1Password. So if there is ever a category of app for which that subscription model was okay, this would be it.
It's so easy to go down, and we're not going to go there. It's a big debate about subscription, but I agree with everything you just said. But the phrase active development is one that I haven't heard used, and that may be a good model for folks who debate the wisdom of a subscription on a particular piece of software to use. Go back and look at the version history, see how often it does get updates, and not the major updates, but all those little updates. That's because that's a borderline objective measurement of how active the developer is.
Yeah. And so that includes adding new features, but not just adding new features for the sake of it, but adding new features that are actually helpful. It also includes fixing bugs, maintaining compatibility with new operating system features and versions, and keeping security clamped down, because there are always new security threats. So I think that's super important. I did want to address the other half of that, though, because it used to be the case that even if you paid 1Password for an annual license, you could still ignore their server in terms of syncing and just say, well, I've got a local copy on this device, and I'm going to use Dropbox, or I'm going to use iCloud, or I'm just going to do a local sync over my own Wi-Fi network to my other devices so that my data never touches the cloud. And I've heard from quite a few people that are like, no, that's really the Electron, whatever, but that's really the final straw, is because I want to have control over my own data. And I find that a little bit baffling, because with your 1Password data, everything is very, very strongly encrypted on your device. No unencrypted data ever leaves your device. And that's true. That was true when you were using Dropbox or iCloud, and it's true when you're using Agile Bits servers. Your data is no less safe there than it would be any place else. That, like, either you trust encryption or you don't. And if you trust encryption, then that's your reason why using Dropbox or iCloud would feel safe to you, because the data is not something that Dropbox can read. It's not something that Apple can read. It's encrypted before it ever leaves your device. It's encrypted while it's there, and it's encrypted in transit, and it's always encrypted. So the same is true for using their servers. The benefit is, when I tried using iCloud Sync and Dropbox Sync in the past, and I was constantly having sync errors and sync problems, and something wouldn't sync for a long time, or something would get stuck. And debugging sync problems was just a constant irritation. And I've never had any sync problems at all with 1Password accounts. It's fast, it's reliable, it just works. And so I can't really see the argument that it's lower in security. It's not. It's at least as secure as it was before. In fact, I would honestly trust, even leaving the encryption aside, I would trust Agile Bits more than I would trust Dropbox with just keeping my data secure on their servers. So, I mean, like, if you just have some philosophical objection to putting anything in the cloud for any reason, just because, like, what you have is a religious belief, and I can't talk you out of your religious belief, but don't tell me that it's rational, because it's not.
Joe Kissell is back in the next edition of MacVoices to talk more about the new 1Password and how it's even better than the 1Password we have used for years. That's next time on MacVoices. We'll see you then. As always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.